Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Curse and Effect, a LitRPG GameLit adventure by A.C. Hadfield, narrated by John Lee. Chapter 1. The female goblin looked at me as though I was something she'd stepped in. She knew I could see her watching me from her poorly hidden position behind a thick oak tree. She'd been tracking me ever since I entered this particular part of Black Birch Wood earlier in the night, when I started my patrol duties. The aforementioned wood is a foreboding ancient woodland that covers most of the northern and eastern sections of Hallows Bridge, my current hometown. This deep in, the moonlight barely broke through the dense canopy, and despite the weather breaking for the better as we approached the middle of spring, here in the UK, I couldn't stop shivering. It wasn't solely from the low temperatures. Black birch had a thing about it that set me on edge. The fact that the veil between our world and the other side here stretched perilously thin at certain points. This necessitated the likes of me and my fellow Arkane Academy people to patrol the area, to ensure no supernatural griblies got through and munched on the unsuspecting citizenry. We were mostly successful. This was the case all over the world, with sites of power drawing in the nasties. However, goblins pretty much kept to themselves, regarding the general human population more of a threat to them than the reverse. They knew the danger of exposing their existence to the public, and therefore kept within the dark folds of black birch and other such gloomy places. Despite the goblins' self-seclusion, we still had to keep their numbers down so they didn't get too organised and cause any trouble. "A large, dark foe getcha. I see you watching," I said, putting into practice my goblinese. I'd been studying it as part of my extracurricular studies for the last few months. The Academy has a kind of Duolingo for various supernatural races. I knew my pronunciation was rough, but goblin speech wasn't designed for human mouths. Despite my lack of finesse, it got this particular creature's attention. Her long ears twitched. She froze, confusion written across her ugly mug. I'm not being unkind here. Goblins are disgusting, evil creatures, and by that I mean their favourite barbecue recipes include baby humans dipped in their secret sauce. I would advise against asking what's in their sauce. I'm told it's quite tasty, however. This particular specimen stood about 3 feet tall, and wore an outfit of roughly tailored animal skins and furs. I saw some badger and squirrel parts in there, and furs of things that didn't look native to our realm. Her face was coloured with a reddish hue, and her skin was pockmarked and boil-covered, giving her a permanently diseased look. Bulbous green eyes with a narrow vertical slit for a pupil widened as she continued to observe me. "Gak shen bulba, you stink human," she replied, before darting behind a tree. I sighed and trudged on, continuing to follow my prescribed patrol route, all the while keeping an eye on my follower. She was probably just a local wilderness goblin, the kind that subsists on woodland fare, but it wasn't wise to keep them at your back, unattended, for too long, lest they get any ideas. I was, after all, a potentially large meal. In my right hand I wielded what regular people would assume to be nothing more than a Swiss Army pocket-knife. With one magical word and a concentrated visual, it would change into virtually any melee weapon I could imagine. This magic was required so I could remain armed at all times, and not scare old Doris in the high street with my massive weapon. Likewise, the leather jacket was a glamoured breastplate. One couldn't be too armoured these days. Wondering what the rest of my unit was up to, I continued on, sweeping the woodland around me for anything unusual. The previous night's patrol member had told me to look out for any peculiar carvings on tree trunks. Someone had detected unusual activity near an old stone structure that was once a standing stone. The fear was that another hag, a kind of witch, had made her way through from the other side. If that were the case, she'd likely mark her territory and set her boundaries with runes and other magical symbols. Having faced a hag before, I was in no hurry to discover another. An hour went by. Apart from the occasional owl and a frightened hedgehog, I hadn't seen anything else of note. The goblin was still following. At some point, she passed me and was now 20 metres ahead. She picked at her blackened teeth with the tip of her rusty dagger. It seemed dental care wasn't high on her kind's list of priorities. I willed my pocket-knife into a short sword and glared at her. "Hashug uzg gak fogeng ik uske. What are you looking at, ugly?" I said, moving directly toward her, losing patience with her lurking presence. She turned and swished aside her furs, exposing a rotten arse covered in disgusting clinkers. She slapped one cheek before giving me the goblin equivalent of the wanker sign. "Gashketlok ga." I didn't understand the remark, though a betting man wouldn't bet against it being a foul insult. She giggled in that tortured, scratching way of her kind, farted so loud an owl hooted in response, then ran off into the woods yelling, "Jaroeg bek mwikar." As best I could translate it, it sounded like she was calling my mother a whore pig. Such high culture. I wasn't going to stand by and let one of these foul creatures insult me, so I chased after her. She was crashing through the woods clumsily, making little effort to disguise her escape. Branches slapped me in the face, and I nearly fell arse over tit from a fallen log hidden in the gloom, camouflaged by years of moss and other vegetation. Regaining my balance, I pushed on, determined to catch up with the beast and give her a peace of mind and sword. I had tolerated her presence long enough. Now it was time to do my duty. She leaped over a narrow brook, displaying considerable agility. Once on the other side, she turned to face me and spat something yellow on the ground before calling me a son of a cursed slime. I narrowed the gap, jumped over the brook, and chased her down, infuriated by her and generally pissed off with the whole situation. I didn't want to be here. I was missing my fellow night riders and my dog, Whiskers, who was back at the apartment with my roommate, Sylvia. My situation was ultimately a punishment for my academy code breaches, and I had agreed to take it without complaint. Well, perhaps a little complaint, but mostly I kept that to myself. No point digging oneself a deeper hole than necessary. When I got within a few metres of my quarry, she suddenly dashed to her left, behind a copse of trees. Being middle-aged and not as agile as her kind, I took a few more steps before I could change direction. She had timed it just right. As soon as my foot hit the loose leaf litter, I knew I had screwed up. The loamy surface gave way. I fell into a hole. I'd laugh, given my recent comment about digging holes, if I wasn't so shocked. Exposed roots scratched at my hands and face as I collapsed awkwardly into the base of the trap. My sword dug into the dirt. My ankle turned, and I fell backward, hitting the back of my skull against the wall of soil and stone. I let out a yell of pain and frustration. For a few moments I remained in a squatted position, assessing the damage. The trap itself was only about 4 metres deep, but the sides were sheer and free from any apparent footholds. I could eventually make some with my weapon, but it would be a long and laborious task. My ankle throbbed and began to swell. I may have sprained it, or worse. Not wanting to wait it out, I removed my Converse shoe, rolled down my sock, and wrapped my hand around the already bruising ankle. I closed my eyes and concentrated, sensing the undercurrent of power that ran through me. I channeled it down my arm and into my hand. A warming sensation flooded the injured area. A white light glowed from my hand as I continued to channel the healing energy. My heart rate kicked up a notch and sweat dripped from my forehead, all part of the process. I stayed that way until my head buzzed with a lightness not too dissimilar to smashing some Jaeger bombs. The pain in my ankle eased. I sat back and waited for my breathing to slow, and to recover from both the exertion of the chase and the healing. The goblin's head appeared at the top of the trap. She looked down at me and laughed. "Gak wigast, you are done." What a great way to start my patrol duties, being outwitted and mocked by a goblin. I looked up at her, shrugged my shoulders, and requested she help me out. In response, she spat at me. The viscous yellow substance splashed inches to the side of me. It stunk of sulphur and something that Whiskers might have coughed up. "Gak uignlech, now you are food." Logic wasn't their strong suit either. I replied as best I could that she was saying by eating me, she was, essentially, by her own words, going to be eating dung. Her brow creased and her eyes narrowed as she thought about it. Then her red skin glowed ever more crimson, the realization of her stupidity dawning on her. It often took them a while. She pulled the dagger from her furs and reached her arm back, ready to throw it down at me. I scrambled to my feet, preparing to dodge as well as I could, given I was the figurative fish in a barrel. Before her arm could thrust forward, a shadow loomed over her. She spun around, dropped the dagger and screamed. Her bleat lasted all of a quarter of a second. A reptilian beast, the size of a bus, chomped down. The massive creature raised its scaly neck into the air and swallowed the goblin whole in much the same way a snake devours a mouse. Its scales gleamed a bright white, even in the low ambience of the moonlight. The exposed underside of its belly was the colour of ham. The outline of the goblin made its way down a neck as long as any tree trunk. Once the bulge in its great neck disappeared, its ancient-looking horned snout let out a belch of magical flame that lit up the surrounding woods. Then it turned its face to me, its great head filling the top of the trap. Its horns and large crocodile-like teeth scraped at the edge. I pushed myself as far back as the narrow space would allow. Its huge nostrils flared with each voluminous inhale. Gigantic yellow eyes swiveled to fix me in its gaze. If my description hadn't made it clear by now, I was staring into the eyes of a gigantic white dragon. Its mouth opened, displaying a horror film scene of razor-sharp teeth and a forked tongue. "You must be Steve," the creature said with a lilting Welsh accent that reminded me of Tom Jones. I blinked, surprised at the odd human-sounding voice coming from this nightmare vision. Yes," I said. "Please tell me you're Jerezriel, the dragon that Zan and the Academy said would be helping me with my patron problem." "Of course. How many dragons do you know?" "If my ex-mother-in-law counts, then at least 2. "Don't besmirch me by association, Steve Firestone." Its eyes flashed. A fiery glow appeared at the back of its throat. "I'm sorry," I exclaimed. "I make jokes when I'm nervous." It let out a belly laugh that rumbled through the woods like thunder. "I'm playing with you, puny human. Now let's lift you out of that goblin hole, shall we, and get acquainted before I fracture your pathetic mind into a million pieces. Solve your curse issue." In a blink of an eye, the great white dragon turned into a kindly-looking older man wearing a tweed suit. His hair was white and hung gracefully against his shoulders in long curls. A leather patch covered his left eye. He knelt by the side of the trap and offered his hand. I had to jump to reach, but as soon as we clasped hands, he lifted me out of the trap with a strength that belied his appearance, though not that shocking, given he was a massive bloody dragon beyond the magical illusion of his current form. Where the extra mass goes, I can't tell you. I once asked one of the wizards at the Academy, and they talked for 15 minutes on trans-dimensional and interstitial spaces, barely uttering more than a handful of words I understood. When I stood and cleaned the dirt from my clothes, I thanked him and offered him my hand, fearing he would crush the bones to dust. His touch, however, was gentle, if not a little limp. I guess such a powerful entity didn't need a firm handshake to show their dominance. "Nice to meet you, Steve," he said. "I am indeed the great and powerful Jerezriel, 7th Lord of the Dragon Realms, conqueror of the Ruby Dreamscape, plunderer of Hell's secrets, gatherer of the 9 arcane laws, severer of the eldritch bonds, first of his name, last of his clan, wanderer of the 12 deserts, the grand magus of the 9 apostles, sole survivor of the great schism, the one true crystal champion, High Archduke of Eldus, the great collector of Astariad, smiter of Throm, heir to the throne of Lasnagar, bearer of bad news, and Tottenham Hotspur season ticket holder. But you can call me Jerry." Chapter 2. We chit-chatted for about an hour while Jerry accompanied me on my patrol. It was getting close to midnight, but I still had 4 more hours left of my shift. Despite my concern regarding Jerry, he came across as quite a decent chap. He had a good sense of humour and indulged my many questions, some even on dragon anatomy, which would make your gran blush. Considering the many days left of my patrol duty, I was thankful for his company. During our light-hearted conversation, the real reason for Jerry's companionship almost slipped my mind. As though already inside my head, the old dragon casually brought it up while we continued to hike through the woods. Zan brought me up to speed on the curse. It's a terrible business, Jerry said. You could say that. Level with me, Jerry. What are the odds that you can get rid of this curse and leave me mind intact? He stopped, leaned against his walking cane. It had a sphere of amber the size of an apple on the top. His hands surrounded it. He looked directly at me with his one good eye. I can't give you a definitive answer until I get to know you better and start poking around in that mind of yours. But considering the entity to which you are bound and cursed, in my professional opinion, I'd say about 5%. My throat dried. Not much, eh? Lucky me, I guess. He tapped his cane against my right bicep. That's the spirit, lad. You have to be optimistic. It'll make my job easier. How does your method work? I asked, and set off again. Jerry drew up next to me, matching me stride for stride. He moved entirely unlike his aged appearance. Well, he said with a bright, jovial tone, we'll spend a few days together while you do your patrol. We'll get to know each other better. The mental connection that I will use needs to be built with familiarity and trust. Think of me as a potential lover. I'd rather not, I said. No offence, but I already have a lover and she's hotter than you. The elder dragon laughed. I'm sure she is, but right now, Steve, you don't have the luxury of choice. Your hot girlfriend won't be able to fix your cure, no matter how good her skills, whereas I have done this for thousands of years. You must have a good review average on Dragon Advisor, then. 5 stars across the board. However, my line of work is rather binary. The subjects are either cured and happy or they're not, and in no condition to review my services. How many people have you killed doing this kind of work? I asked, as I stepped over a series of logs that hadn't so much fallen, but looked as if some great animal had wrenched them out of the ground. I stopped to inspect. Oh, that was me, Jerry said, tapping his cane against a silver birch trunk. What happened? Just a bit of hunting, nothing to concern yourself with. I looked him square in the eye. How many subjects of yours have died? None, Jerry said with no hint that he was lying. Although, to be fair, it's difficult to tell, what with his patch and the fact he was ancient and therefore likely well-versed in deception. That doesn't tally, given your rather low odds of success. I didn't say nobody failed, just that even if this procedure doesn't work as the subject hopes, death is rarely the result. No, it's far worse than that. But let's not get into numbers. It won't help. Besides, the likelihood of success is more on you than it is on me. That is why the time we'll spend together is so important. You need to learn a few things. Stepping around the felled trees, I headed down a well-worn track toward a wider section of the brook. And what are those? Jerry didn't even bother to use the stepping stones that cut a path across the brook. He hovered across it as though it were the most normal thing in the world. The first is you need to learn to trust me. The second is to trust yourself. And finally, the third is to learn what your patron truly is. It's a space squid, I said, then swore when my foot slipped on the last stone and dunked into the cold water. That's one way of describing it, Jerry said. It's certainly not of this realm. It doesn't even live in this plane of existence. It's exceptionally powerful to have connected with you in such a way, though your family line has certainly helped bridge the connection via the curse of the so-called moat. I rejoined a dirt track and started to head toward a section of the wood where a previous patrol had reported a potential sighting of wild cats. It was most likely just some druids or some other shapeshifter from the Academy. Regardless, the Academy asked that I keep an eye in case it was something else. Did you know them? My ancestors? I asked. In a way, yes. Raznion and Arizar were in hell during my brief stay. We didn't get much time to chat, what with Asmodeus being a tyrant and all. What were they like?" He shrugged. "I couldn't say, but it's important that you don't focus on them too much. Though they may appear to you at times when you're channeling your patron's power, they're just figments of its imagination. You have to understand that your patron is not, and never has been, understandable. It's an entity unlike anything here or the other side. There's no frame of reference for the way it thinks or communicates. It would be like you trying to communicate with a halibut." I rounded a pothole, considered what he had said. It sounded like he was suggesting the entity was trying to deceive me in some manner by showing me visions of my ancestors. To what end, though? I guessed I would find out eventually. As we continued to walk and patrol, I asked, "Can you explain more of this so-called mote of power that is the carrier for the curse? In Marie Jackson's journal entry, she made it sound as though it's a physical object, yet I have nothing that could remotely be such a thing." Jerry thought about it for a moment, tapping a finger against his chin in rhythm to the swing of his cane. "I think this Marie Jackson was clutching at straws. As far as my knowledge extends, the mote is a metaphor for the connection to the entity, perhaps a play on the biblical quote. So not the sci-fi novel." Jerry glanced at me, waiting for me to elaborate. It was nice to have knowledge that an elder dragon did not. "Pornell and Niven," I explained, "wrote a book called The Mote in God's Eye, the titular mote referring to a celestial body." "Interesting." His lips spread into the tiniest of smiles, as though he absorbed that factoid with all the joy of a fine amuse-bouche. "Either way, I suspect it's more of a metaphysical thing rather than an actual object. Once I've generated a map of your psyche, I'll surely be more informed on the topic. How does your voodoo work, then? You get to know me, and then what exactly do you do?" "It's a complicated process. How familiar are you with metaneural quantum transients?" I could write on a stamp what I don't know about that. "Total expert, me," I said as I stopped and looked deeper into the woods. I spotted some leaves of a bush moving somewhat erratically. Perhaps it was another goblin keeping its beady eyes on us. Maybe the partner of Jerry's earlier snack. "I don't need to be a legendary telepath to detect sarcasm," Jerry replied. He sidled up beside me, leaned patiently on his cane. He watched me watching the bushes and spoke in hushed tones. "In short, my time with you will test you both mentally and physically. During these times, I will continue to build a mental model of your mind, so that I may eventually enter and navigate through it. Think of it as a maze in its most basic form." "So, which are you, the Minotaur or Theseus?" I continued to focus on the shuddering bushes ahead of me, the scant moonlight providing enough illumination to pick out the movement. "Using your analogy," Jerry said, "I would say I'm closer to being Ariadne. It is I who will be giving your soul the thread to find its way out of the labyrinth, the curse that traps you so." "That thread seems to be quite the poisoned chalice. Now you're mixing your myths. Shh! There's something up ahead. Go do your thing, paladin," Jerry urged. "I'll wait here." Grumbling to myself that he could at least help if he were going to mind-fuck me, I stalked closer to the area of disturbance. I drew to within 2 meters and reached out with my sword to part the bush, fully expecting something horrible to launch out at me like an alien face-hugger. What I saw was worse. Much worse. 2 naked goblins were vigorously becoming the beast with 2 backs. Seeing a goblin's junk wasn't high on my list of probable sights during my patrol. The stink was overpowering. The one on top was sweating so profusely, thick green gunk slathered its already putrid skin. The one beneath was so red she looked sore from toe to scalp. They glow like a forge when amid their horizontal quick-step. Sweaty looked up at me mid-pump. For a moment it ignored and carried on. I couldn't but help look away and give them some privacy while they finished. The moment I turned away, however, I heard them scramble to their feet. I returned my attention. The pair were on their feet, blades equipped and swinging toward me. They can sure move quickly when they need to. With their respective junks swinging along with their blades, I was forced onto the back foot to regain my balance and composure. From the corner of my eye, I spied Jerry impassively watching on as though he were observing ducks on his walk through the park. No help for me, then. That was fine. I'd faced off against bigger and worse threats than these two exhibitionists. I easily swatted away the first strikes with my sword, a much larger weapon than Sweaty's tiny dagger. His partner's blade was heftier, more akin to a machete. She slashed at me furiously, forcing me to put some effort in. I held them at bay with a series of parries I had perfected from my classes with my melee tutor, Manfred von Cleven. Following his lessons, once I had them unbalanced, I pressed the attack with a series of rapid arcing slashes. I caught Sweaty in the chest with one slash, and the top of his thigh with the return swing, narrowly missing his baby maker. The wife, partner, harlot, sister, or whatever she was, screamed and tried to pull him away, but dropped her machete in the process. I stepped forward and cut her in the belly. She snarled and readied to spit at me. I was too quick, and brought my sword down in a chopping blow that bit deeply into her arm. The pair backed off, all the while screaming obscenities at me with such velocity I couldn't make out their exact words. None were good, that much was evident. I told them I would let them live if they returned to the other side and showed me their portal. That way I could report it to the Academy, who would have their magic users shut it down. In response, they swore they'd defecate on my corpse. Twice. "You have but little option to kill them," Jerry said from his observant position behind me. "I know," I said. "I just wanted to give them a chance. You are cognizant of their being manifestations of the purest evil, yes? So everyone tells me. Doesn't make it easier killing them. They're so disgusting and pathetic. They think that about your kind, too." Sweaty nodded toward Jerry. "Garkagumgioig kjarn." "He says, your father is right," I translated for Jerry. "You got that wrong, Steve," Jerry replied. "Grumji means lover, not father." "Oh, that's gross." I turned back to Sweaty and, in the best goblinese I could muster, told him that Jerry was a friend, not my lover. The pair looked doubtful, then spat at my feet again. I wished they would stop doing that. "Right, you filthy bastards, I've had enough." I brandished my sword and dashed forward, ready to end their miserable lives. They turned tail and ran. "You best make haste before they make their escape," Jerry called out. "Would it hurt to lend a hand, old man?" I shouted as I dashed for the goblins. All I heard in response was a jolly laugh. Once he got into my mind, I doubt he would be laughing, not with the colourful rant of insults I was generating. The two goblins were quick despite their injuries. That said, I held them in view, even though I was more careful this time. I didn't want to fail my perception and fall into another trap. I carried on chasing for a couple more minutes when I saw them burst through into a clearing that I'd never seen before. Given the vastness and weirdness of the black birch woods, that's not exactly surprising. However, it was revealing in that the two goblins streaked across the glade, covering half of it in a few seconds before coming to a stop before a shabby patchwork leather shelter the size of an old-fashioned carnival tent. The doors flapped open and they disappeared inside. I continued to follow until I got within 20 meters of the tent. All the hairs on my arms tingled. The air around me seemed heavier, electrically charged. I had experienced something like this before, and had read descriptions of this very sensation. A crossing point. Somewhere inside that tent, the goblins had their magical portal to and from the other side. I reached for my phone to call Zan and report what I had found. A horrible, screeching sound pealed out. Hundreds of birds took flight as one, and then the woods became unnaturally silent. There was no phone signal. I swore and turned, hoping that Jerry was changing back to his dragon form to help me. Fat chance of that. However, I did see him lurking at the boundary, but in no way did it seem he was interested in lending a hand. He remained, as before, leaning against his cane, watching with his one good eye. The doors to the tent flapped open. Another awful screech split the air.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?